So one of the examples I know of is of a guy I met, let's call him James. So he had a sizable property portfolio and he was looking to grow really quickly. So he had about 6 to 7 properties in his name and he was just looking to scale at that point. And some of the things that he said he was encountering were not knowing how much he was making from his property. So of course he knew that, he had mortgage expenses to cover as part of his bills, he had repairs, he had maintenance, and then he had the letting agents as well who were managing the properties. And so at this point, he didn't know exactly how much he was making in his business other than having to wait for his accountant to give him a set of numbers at the end of the year. He also didn't know, how much he'd be paying in tax until the end of the year came. So they only had like a conversation once a year to talk about the numbers and file the accounts. So then at that point, that's the only time I'd see how much profit or loss he had made, how much tax he was paying, what his cash was looking like, other than just having access to his bank account with a cash app and knowing what the number is that sits in there. But that number, the difficulty could include some money that's obviously going to go out. So in some instances, you already have incurred expenses but haven't paid for them. Or maybe you've paid for expenses in advance that you haven't yet incurred, and so that's assets that you can also be counting in as well. In some instances he just didn't know what the position of his business was, and what this does is it just made him make decisions randomly based on his gut feel. So he was able to buy a property, or he would decide to buy a property based on how much he would fork in additionally into the business, not just on what the business was doing or where it was. And because he had started to grow his property portfolio, he continued to put in all his work and all his resources into all these properties, not knowing which ones were profitable, for example, because some really could have been loss-making or could have been, just bleeding out resources depending on what's happening on the properties. So as you know, this can cause like just late night stress and over-reliance on, an accountant that will come once a year, maybe a generalist as well, who's not in your particular niche, because you're not effectively tracking your business, not effectively tracking your expenses, for example. So you don't know exactly where you stand or where you would be in a few months' time, or maybe in 2 years' time. You don't know exactly where your business is. So some of the decisions are not really informed. They're more gut feel, or you're doing it based on what's happened in the moment. I've got a raise from my salary, or I've got this cash that I've pulled out from another property. Now I can invest. But does that mean that you should be investing just because you've got some cash? You need to be able to understand your business a lot more. So what I did with him was to sit with him and clearly segment his income and expenses. What that means is you're reporting by unit. So for the properties, you're reporting to say, this is the revenue by the unit, this is the expenses, so the mortgage fees, the repairs, and you're clearly splitting it out by those units, so you can see clearly which properties are profitable, which properties are not profitable. It's not every property that is profitable, and having to do that helped him clearly see which ones were not, and one wasn't actually profitable. It was barely even breaking even because it had quite a few service repairs, and the letting agent was different, so he was using a different agent for that property. The fees were higher than the income that was coming in because it's not a property that was, located in an area where he could charge more rentals. So it wasn't making a lot of money. And so he just saw like from time to time, he wasn't even making any profit on that property. And he had to change his strategy or get rid of that property because it was actually draining him of profits. Another thing we did was to map out expenses clearly. So looking at, the actual categories of these expenses, instead of just grouping things as saying property costs or property A costs, you're actually splitting which ones are mortgage costs, which ones are interest, which ones are council tax. So the ones that you can do without, ones that are fixed, and some that are variable, you can see which ones you can scale down on and which ones you cannot. And what he did see from this was he was overspending on a builder that actually wasn't delivering any quality. So a cost that he could have reduced by finding another builder or replacing the builder that he was using for his repairs and his maintenance. So something that he could have done earlier if he was tracking some of those expenses, because you are inclined to think that, you can change your costs other than knowing that you can reduce them, obviously, but if you don't have the specifics, you don't know exactly which ones you can cut down on and where you can save, which ones, for example, are tax deductible and which ones are not. And so you want to have a clear picture so you can see where you're getting a benefit and where maybe you could cut down and make room for more benefits. And then also just having a weekly dashboard helped him see what cash was coming in, how much was outstanding that he had to pay, how much rentals, and having to do that, even though, as a property investor, you probably know from your agents which tenants are, don't usually pay on time, but having a dashboard can actually show you the trends of how that impacts your cash. Sometimes it's a deal breaker, sometimes it's not, and you want to see if you want to keep that tenant or not. Of course, that's a separate topic that, has its own process, but just being able to have that dashboard and being able to see those numbers regularly can help you see exactly what your trends look like. Where do you spend the most and at what point in time? So is there a specific week that you tend to spend more, or is there a specific week maybe you get more call outs on repairs, or specific months in the year? Is there something that can be done ahead of that time? Because you've started to see the trend, you can plan in advance and cut down on some of those costs as well. So essentially that regular reporting just helped him have some good insight in his business, and he was able to see, where he stood in terms of his profits, in terms of his cash flow, where he could save, and where he was compared to his target. So at the end of the day, you're running a business, you have a target. What can you do to achieve your targets? How do you get to your targets? How are you tracking them? Because what you can track and what you can measure, you can't achieve. So if you want to achieve that, you need to be able to track. So that just helps you see, how much of a gap you have to close to get to, the profit levels or the income levels that you want to get to, and ultimately the financial independence that you're looking for at the end of the day. So just to bring it to full circle, what does effective expense tracking and bookkeeping help you with? What are the insights that you can get from having an effective tracking system? Now, I'm not talking about fancy software here or fancy tech, but just having a process in place that gives you an advantage in your business to move forward. What does it actually help you with the system of tracking your expenses? So you have cash flow visibility and management. You know exactly what's coming in, what's going out, and that visibility actually goes out into the future. It's not just something at that point in time. So you can see in 12 months' time, what is my cash likely to look at? And so when you get more cash, is it an opportunity for you to invest, or an opportunity for you to put it back into your business instead of investing in another property and saving for your operational costs so you can get to the next period or the next target that you want to get into? So that visibility comes if you're tracking and if you're looking, if you have a forward outlook of your business. You also have profitability and cost control. You are able to control your costs if you are tracking them. So you are likely to go over budget or to overspend because you're going to see this tool and think, this could help my business. And genuinely, it would help your business. But is it essential? Costs start to get out of control if you're not tracking them and if you don't have a limit. So if you're saying my limit is £2,000, for example, in costs per month, and you see that you're reaching maybe 1,500, it's time to cut down on some of the costs because you still want to leave a little bit of headroom for some unforeseen expenses. So that helps you manage your costs and control them effectively. Financial accuracy and compliance. So you're able to rely on the numbers that you're producing or the numbers that are being produced by your accountant. You know that you will not have issues in the future or someone querying into your numbers to say you've reported this incorrectly, because you know exactly where your business stands and you've been tracking them from time to time. You also don't want to wait until the end of the year for you to be able to start tracking your numbers or to start to account for your numbers and where you've spent money, because that can take a lot of time from you, from your business, and it can cause a lot of stress. It's something you want to do regularly, and you have confidence every month that, the previous month I had the accurate numbers and this is my position this month, and you can rely on those numbers because they are accurate. You can also gain good tax optimization because you're seeing trends in your business. You can quickly see where you can get some tax benefits. It could be from expenses that you can deduct for tax purposes, or maybe where you can get some reliefs or some benefits from the government. You're incurring certain expenses. So for example, let's say if you're doing research and development, you can get R&D tax credits because of that if you meet certain criteria. But if you're not tracking your numbers, you won't be able to see where exactly you have credits, and you won't be able to do it correctly because you need to do it in an accurate way for you to be able to maximize your fullest benefit. So it helps with your tax efficiency. You can get reliefs, you can get tax benefits, you can get credits, tax credits as well. You can place yourself at an advantage in terms of tax if you're tracking your numbers. Again, decision making is more effective and more informed. So when you're making decisions, you're basing it on the right numbers, you're basing it on the right strategies. So if you're saying, let's say that you want a specialist in your business, but you can't afford that, you have a good sense of what you need to do next. Maybe you need to outsource that activity, or maybe you need to replace a builder, like in James' case. So you need to replace that builder and find someone maybe who can deliver the value and give you a better return for your money than what you have at the moment. Or it might be you can't afford what you have now. So what will you find for the money that you can afford, and you can stay within your budget or stay within your track that you've set for yourself to be able to achieve your goals. So those are just some of the insights that you get, and you should consider doing that effectively. You don't necessarily need to hire an accountant or a bookkeeper to do the work for you. You can do it on your own, but just make sure you're tracking. Get automation softwares that can do this for you. Stay on top of them, and you will see how your business will change dramatically from a strategic point, and just insights and how your decisions will be made going forward. I hope that was helpful. But if you have any questions on how to track some of these numbers, how to report them, drop a comment in the box below or just DM me and I'll be able to assist. Thanks for watching.